Hey everyone, now that I have my plugs in from my vendor, I noticed that the ferns have been growing on for quite a while and needed a bit more space for their roots. And so I thought it was a good time to pot those up. I started with my Pro Mix that I use for most of my plants, and I put that into the bin that I'm going to use to pot them up. I've already filled 3 trays with 4-inch pots so that we can pot all of the ferns into them. It's amazing how one tray of fern liners can spread out and fill three trays of 4-inch potted ferns. My first step was to separate the entire tray into all of the 4-inch pots. And I always do this first so that when I go ahead and pot them up, it's a much quicker process to just add potting soil and tamp it in. As I was doing that, some smaller ferns were coming off the sides, and so I was separating those out and put those into their own individual cans as well. And then from there, it's really just a process of potting up. So 1 fern per 4-inch can filled up with some potting soil. Eventually these ferns will go into hanging baskets and other large planters, but for right now I don't have that kind of room to store since the weather's not great outside, and so all of my plants are inside until it gets a little nicer outside for the plants to go out into the greenhouse. So the best situation right now is to do 3 trays and store them that way and let them grow on a little bit until I can get them into hanging baskets and large planters. Some of these ferns needed some trimming, so I just did a really quick trim on some of the plants as they were growing into one another. And so that's what you see me doing here. And then you just continued potting up. I don't know if I've mentioned before, but this fern is a macho fern, and a macho fern has big, bold leaves, and it grows larger than a Boston fern or a Kimberly queen fern. And so this particular plant is really good for large urns or planters, and the fronds grow 3 to 4 feet long. This fern likes to grow in a little bit of shade, so either partially shaded with a little bit of morning sun and some afternoon shade, or just a little bit of shade while it's growing outside. And it does really like to be a little protected from the wind. Make sure that this fern gets enough water, especially when it's really hot out. And sometimes this is a daily or 2 times a day watering. You also need to make sure to feed it once in the summer or something like that to make sure that the potting soil just has a little bit of added nutrients to support the growth of the fern. At the end, I took all of the smaller ferns that had started growing in the air and potted those in a pot together so that they could grow on as well. Getting to this part and having some extra ferns to pot up was a nice thing. So this tray of fern liners comes out to a little under $60 a tray, which would, at a count of 48 ferns, would be about $1.20 a fern. But in this instance, because I potted up some of these smaller cuttings, essentially, I ended up with 54 4-inch pots of ferns. So that brought the entire tray down to about $1 a 4-inch pot, which I think is a pretty good deal, especially since these plants eventually, during the course of growing on this year, will fill an entire 10-inch pot. I will probably pot them a couple ferns to a pot just because I have a few extra and it isn't a bad deal for me to do that. But even if you consider that, a little bit of time, a little bit of potting soil, these trays I'll reuse. The fern liner tray of all the plugs I will reuse. And so I would have purchased potting soil anyway. And in this case, I'll have many planters and pots for myself and to split with friends and family. See you next time.